Okay, so we're going to get started here. Welcome everybody to our vCISO news topic of the month for December, which is on qualified individuals. Typically, we'd ask you to mute your microphones. This is a relatively small group. I think we picked about as busy as a time as we could. So we are recording this session. So for any of you out there that happen to miss it, or if you have colleagues that may be interested in it, we'll be recording this. We'll put it up on the vCISO News YouTube channel. We'll post it on LinkedIn, so you'll be able to get at this information. As some of you know, we do monthly. We have a monthly cadence of sharing information and really networking and education from our vCISO community to the rest of our community. And really, it's designed to take a topic that's of interest to our vCISO consulting community and have an expert educate on it, and then open it up for discussion. Been really impressed with the willingness of the group to come forward and share these topics, and then the dialogue's been great as well. And I hope you guys get a lot out of it. I certainly enjoy learning from you all, and we're here to be kind of a centralized resource, allowing you all to communicate with each other and share information. So as I mentioned, today's topic on the new reporting requirements, what is a qualified individual? Leading this discussion today will be Mike Morano, and I think most of you know me. Quick background on myself: I'm the president and co-founder of Symbol Security. Symbol Security is a security awareness training platform. We work very closely with virtual CISOs, security consultants, and MSSPs. For the 3 years plus that we've been in business, I've been really impressed with the value that virtual CISOs bring to the community. I think it's an incredibly important role going forward, given the market dynamics around security, and also the realities of finding truly qualified security experts, and the challenges finding them in full-time positions, and the realities of the effectiveness of the virtual CISO practice. So I'm a huge supporter of the movement, and Mike Morano, who's with us today, I know has been somebody that's been really great for this community as well. So I want to turn it over to Mike just for quick introductions, and then we'll get right into the content. And I would say for today, Mike, as you're working through the content, if there's questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can feel free to jump in at an appropriate time. We'll also take some questions at the end. So I'd like to introduce Mike Morano. So Mike, go ahead. You can take it from here, and then I'll jump into your presentation when you're done with the intro.
Cool. As always, appreciate you putting this stuff together. I know it's a lot of work, and definitely appreciate your commitment to our community, and of course, just creating time and setting things like this up. I mean, you're definitely a rock star for all the folks on this call, above and beyond just the folks. I know we're a small group today, and if you've never seen me before on one of Craig's other events, or another another event in the community, I'm Michael Morano. I've been working in technology since the 90s. I've rose through the ranks from engineer, tech support, through managing director, CTO, CISO. And it's over 6 years ago now that regulators such as the SEC and FINRA really started to focus on cybersecurity. And it was at that point where things I had been doing since day one, when I was running around with a floppy disk updating Norton antivirus, became the highest priority of my job, cybersecurity. So at that time, I was able to transfer to a consulting organization where I focused on helping financial firms, the registered investment advisors, FINRA, SEC, build out their cybersecurity programs. And it was at that point where I first started to notice organizations needed additional cybersecurity expertise and resources. In between assessments, there was a lot that just didn't happen anymore. And they didn't have somebody in-house who had the technical skills or know-how to keep their programs on track in between my risk assessments. So that's when I started to develop the virtual CISO program. This is way back in 2016. And at that time, the virtual CISO program was relatively new. You didn't really hear about it much from the regulators. And the idea of outsourcing.
Sorry. No, what do you?
the idea of outsourcing the CISO role, or the CISO role in general, was just so new to many organizations. They didn't have one. They weren't thinking of a temp or fractional or virtual or part-time CISO back then. Many organizations still have not even hired one full-time. And what we've seen evolving now since about that time is the movement, or at least the requirement now from regulators, about the qualified individual. And that's why I thought it was kind of important that we start to discuss this as a group, because the qualified individual has been around for a while. It's not something new. It's new to the CISO role. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. And we'll also talk about where the qualified individual is also historically already been in existence, and what that's looked like, and how we could use that information that's already out there to help us prepare for the inevitable, what we know is going to come down the pipeline. Because as the qualified individual, or the qualified CISO individual, becomes a more prominent position, and many of us start to fill that role in registered organizations, and organizations that are highly registered, our names are going to be in their contacts, in their regulatory contacts, as the qualified person who's overseeing the program. And we've seen this happen over and over again for our peers in the outsourced compliance officer, the outsourced CFO, and the outsourced operations officer. These roles have been in existence for a long time. We've seen the regulators start to laser beam in on those folks. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing, or what we should anticipate happens to the qualified individual CISO role as well, knowing the history of what's happened to those other roles.
Hey, Mike, you can cue me when you need to go next slide. So just give me a
let's jump into the first slide.
Great.
And let me just gather my voice for a moment.
Sure. And Mike, as you're doing that, one of the things that I immediately think of for the vCISO community is, personal, professional liability. So I'm sure you'll hit that, but that immediately came to mind.
Well, we'll definitely touch on that when we start to talk about future proofing, right? And I'm sure everybody on this call who already either does this full time or dabbles has insurance in place, because we're in a position where we're helping organizations prepare for the inevitable, and our advice potentially could impact the data protection, the potential regulatory discipline for an organization that's not doing the things that we're suggesting as well. So that liability is a really good point. So qualified individual, I'm sure a lot of folks are like, what the hell is that? And why is that all of a sudden a topic that we're talking about? Well, a qualified individual, I mean, it's been defined multiple ways. It's something you can easily Google and find tons of information about, but it's somebody who has the skills, the experience, the education, somebody who is an expert in that role. And what we've learned over and over again is, in our industry, and what makes a CISO, what makes a qualified cybersecurity person, is somebody with experience, right? There's very few degrees in cybersecurity, or at least there have been very few over the years. And many of us as experienced professionals, we didn't go to school for cybersecurity. It didn't even exist. Didn't even have computer science when I was back in college. So our experience is really what makes us professionals and qualified individuals. And there's a whole host of other things, right? Continuing education, the certifications that all of us have, that alphabet soup that comes after my name, all of those hard-earned certifications, that master's degree in cyber and homeland security. These are all things that all of us are doing to make ourselves, or identify ourselves as qualified individuals to hold that role. And this is something that the regulators are going to start to look at more, as the organizations we work for put our name in the dotted line that says, who is your CISO? And this has been coming up a lot, especially since like 2016, 2015, even FINRA, excuse me again, guys, even FINRA now since 2015 has had in their advisors, or in their member companies, who is your CISO? It's listed as a it's not mandatory, but it's listed as somebody you can put in there. So once your name is in there, guess what happens? You go into the database of FINRA, and FINRA actually does a lot of data analysis. And if your name comes up as being the CISO for a dozen organizations, you know what's going to happen? And we've seen this happen with our peers, our friends in compliance. They go, how many companies are you working with? Do you have the bandwidth to do that? And this is something that we're anticipating. We'll talk about a little bit later. But the qualified individual or the qualified CISO, I believe, is something that all of us are familiar with, and what makes us a professional, what makes us better than our peers, or what makes us a more qualified, the subject matter expert that we all probably claim to be at this point in time. It's the years of experience, it's the education, it's the battles that we've all fought. It's the hard-earned, battle-tested skills that we all have, and of course, the certifications, the continuing education. Those things like your CISSPs, they don't come easy, and they're not easy to maintain either. I just had a call with somebody a little while ago where I was like, I got to finish my continuing ed for the year because it's that time of year again. Got to renew. So let's jump into that next slide and talk a little bit about the history. So you hear me say this a couple times in the previous slides. You heard me say this. It's been around for a few years. The qualified individual is nothing new. And it's something that the regulators have had in their sights for a while. For years now, the SEC, FINRA, have been talking about the qualified individual. And way back in 2015, which seems like a lifetime ago now, is when outsourcing of some of these roles was actually approved. The SEC actually approved this. And we'll see in the coming slides what happens once the SEC or another regulatory body starts to allow these types of roles, and how it's going to impact us as the virtual CISO or the qualified CISO, qualified individual CISO for some of these organizations. But this has been going on for a long time. Way back when things like Enron happened, or master of Ponzi schemes Bernie Madoff, built folks of billions of dollars. That's when we started to see what they call shadow accounting, shadow services to oversee or have additional oversight. And what will probably start to happen too is we could anticipate that might happen too for security professionals, the security teams. We do that now with risk assessments. We're bringing in third parties. In many cases, it's actually us who is that third party to oversee the team, but providing that extra sets of hands, extra set of eyes to a team that's already in existence, like our peers have started to do, the CFOs, the CCOs, and the COOs, and even the CTO, the virtual CTO, the fractional CTO, has been around for several years already as well. Let's jump into the next one. And anybody, if you have any questions at any point, or if there's something that you want to add to the conversation, please, it's plenty of wiggle room to add to dialogue here. We're a small group, and I definitely encourage it. I have no hard feelings if anybody interrupts me, for sure.
Hey, Mike, something on my mind just related to qualified individual, where a lot of you are incorporated, or you sit as multi-member LLCs. Is it acceptable, or do you see a future where it's acceptable to put the LLC name, as the qualified firm, so to speak, rather than an actual individual person's name?
Yeah, and that's a good point, but we're not the one filling out that attestation or that contact form. It's the client who does. Mm-hmm. And it's actually mentioned, and now that we actually have the NYDFS, New York State Department of Finance, this is one of the first organizations way back in 2017 that actually spoke of having a qualified individual CISO. And this was because many organizations had done what they've done in the past. They had the multi-hat wearing CFO, CCO, COO, office manager, HR professional, doing everything, and then they gave them the CISO title. But NYDFS was one of the first regulatory folks to start to focus on having a qualified individual as the CISO. And NYDFS oversees financial organizations, your broker dealers, your mortgage companies, your insurers. But the difference with NYDFS, or the thing that made it not so significant a few years ago, I mean, it actually went into effect 2 years ago, but it was at the state level. So, you know, New York.
And hey, Mike, one of the things that we've been able to accomplish here at Good Cybersecurity is there's a regional commission in Stratford, New Hampshire, and we've been certified and vetted as the cybersecurity company for all of those companies in New Hampshire. And we can help companies and small businesses throughout New England. And that really has helped us. We've gained a lot of traction because when the small to medium businesses go to the Stratford Regional Commission, they see cybersecurity, please contact Good Cybersecurity. And I get, you know, at least 1 or 2 a week of small businesses that want cybersecurity assistance. So I think that's, you know, and I'm trying to do that now in a couple of other states.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You know, what are the influences, or what are the peer groups or associations that potential clients go to for information? And some of them might not even necessarily know about some of these requirements, right? And you're in a position now where you could actually educate a large group of people just through one of these associations that you're part of. The things that we're talking about, folks outside of the regulatory compliance or legal, you know, a lot of the folks that we interact with on a regular basis at the clients, they're not necessarily other security people. The organizations don't even have security people. It's usually somebody legal. Go ahead.
Exactly, and actually, well, you know, I have a FINRA SEC background too. I spent 15 years at a broker dealer. But one of the things that I'm here is usually it's either the CEO or it's the director of human resources that is calling me saying we need cybersecurity, and I'm like, wow, yeah, they don't even have anybody that's even, you know, they don't even understand. You know, we start with simple stuff like, you know, okay, no, you can't have 8-character passwords. Why?
And that's a great point. They're internal resources that are leading or steering cybersecurity or technology, right? Sometimes it's jumbled together too. They're not qualified. And that's where we come in as that qualified individual. You know, we talked about like the slide before, like what makes us qualified individuals, that experience, but how do we educate, or how do we connect with folks who need qualified individuals? You touched on the great topic of through some of these associations, through some of these groups. And also we know that some of the individuals that need us are not technologists. They're not the CTO or the CIO. It's the office manager. It's the head of HR. It's the GC, if the firm's even lucky to have a general counsel. It's those other folks who sometimes get handed that baton of, you take care of cybersecurity because you know the most about it. That's what we see out there, and that's why it's so important now, as regulators start to publish this material, to start to make folks aware, start to create that awareness. New York State several years ago started the process, but what I was alluding to a little bit earlier was it was New York State. It's a big state. We got lots of businesses in New York State, but nobody else outside of New York State really cared much about it. It was published in all of the news feeds. The regulators and compliance companies talked about it a little bit, but it wasn't until now with the FTC. Let's jump to that next slide. With the FTC created this new focus on the qualified individual. And it's not just a qualified individual, it's the qualified individual CISO, having a qualified individual lead your security program. And what I would start to tell my clients is, it may not have happened yet in your industry, or maybe there's no regulators in requiring it yet in your sector. But now that it's been set by a government agency as big as the FTC, we should we should anticipate it's going to grow. It's going to gain some traction. And many of the regulators just literally cookie cutter what each other are doing. They followed a blueprint, like the same way like everybody follows the SEC, FINRA, CFTC, like they literally just follow in the SEC's footsteps. So we can anticipate that this is going to grow. And this is a relatively new one. This is just literally in the last few months. There's plenty of news sources that are just publishing this for the first time. I had it in my blog post, I believe back in November. This is something that I think awareness is critical. And I think initially we see the covered organizations here as being, again, like financial related, but this is going to grow, especially go ahead,
Mike,
jump in.
I want to ask you a question because I tell people, I deal with a lot of banks and credit unions don't have FINRA, but they have something very similar, credit union regulatory authorities. And that's one of my largest clients in Texas. But I think this is going to be like the next Sarbanes-Oxley, where you as a company are going to have to sign off that you have cybersecurity mitigations in place. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. And I'm still trying to determine where your accent's from. You mentioned New England, now you said Texas. And
no, I'm from Boston, born and raised. Okay. I'm a Patriots fan. But with the Zoom, I can work anywhere. I have a couple of clients in the UK as well. But and that's what I think is coming. There's 18 bills in Congress right now. It's not just going to be the financial institutions. It's going to be every institution that's going to have to prove that they have somebody that's responsible for the cyber mitigation and risk in their organization. And I think that's just going to be broad. And that's what I've been telling people.
I completely agree. I mean, you and I think are reading from the same script, and
okay.
Everywhere you look, you see about the workforce shortage. One of the stats I saw yesterday was there's one cybersecurity person for every 8 job openings. And that doesn't really translate exactly to the CISO job openings or director or head of InfoSec, right? The C-suite roles. It's across the whole scope of cybersecurity. But we know, all of us know this, that there's a huge gap in the number of available resources. And then there's an even bigger gap in the number of ready, able, and willing resources, right? If more organizations are going to be required to have a qualified individual, their only alternative is going to be the virtual CISOs, the army of fractional, part-time virtual CISOs that are available. And this is something I think you and I both agree is going to start expanding across the regulatory scope. And let's jump into the next slide. So, right, the future of the qualified individual CISO. And this is the point of today's conversation. How can we prepare to what Michael Good and I were just talking about? The regulators are going to start to focus more, and they're going to want to see qualified people hold this title, or fill in the blank with somebody who's qualified. And what we could learn from here is, if you look back at what's happened to the virtual compliance officer, and this is a peer or a relationship that many of us have, because we work a lot with the compliance officer or the person in charge of compliance in our current clients. That area has been scrutinized heavily. Way back in 2016, the SEC started doing an annual alert to some of the findings of what does it look like when an organization has a outsourced CCO, compliance officer. And some of the findings here are something we could probably relate to, right? The organizations that had a virtual compliance officer, there seemed to be a disconnect between what the executives knew about cybersecurity and what the outsourced compliance officer knew about compliance. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen as we start to progress in these roles, because we know the regulators have already set their blueprint on how they're going to scrutinize us, right? Just like Spider-Man used to say, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's going to be up to us to make sure that we don't fall into some of these, pitfalls that the other qualified individuals like the CCO and the CFO fell into earlier before us, when the regulators started to scrutinize them and audit and do more oversight. So things like knowing that the policies and procedures, knowing them like the back of our hand, right? That's going to be important. The regulators are going to scrutinize that. It's going to be something they want to look at. And you have to anticipate this as well. This final bullet here, by having an outsourced CISO, if the regulators are more involved and they're focused on that, it potentially brings more scrutiny to the firms, the clients that we're working with. So it's up to us to make sure that we anticipate that, and we cover our butts and we cover our clients' butts to make sure that we have everything in place necessary, learning from the mistakes of the past here. And this is just a few of them. We could probably put together a whole hour of previous audits and assessments and scrutiny of other qualified individuals outside the security world.
I have another thing to add. I'm sorry, but one of the things that I also do is educate board members and executives. And they said, well, what do we have to do with cybersecurity? They try to throw it all on the CTO, or because like you said, most of them don't have a CISO. And I said, you don't have to understand all the minutia of cybersecurity, but you need to understand and be able to oversee the implementation of systems and controls that protect your data. And I can help you understand that. So that when what you got there, the CCOs could not adequately describe the business risks. I mean, every board and every executive should be able to describe the business risks. I mean, I had a conversation with a CEO in California, and it's like, sir, he was complaining about the bill. And I said, well, I lived in California for 7 years. What would do more damage to your business, an earthquake or a cyber attack? And 2 minutes later, he sent me the signed contract because, and then I said, look, get your board and your executives together. I don't care if you're the CFO, the chief marketing officer. You need to have a basic understanding of systems and controls that protect your business.
Agreed. And it's not a one-time exercise, right?
No, I do it every quarter.
Yeah. And that's the lessons learned from the mistakes of the past, and not necessarily the mistakes of us or CISOs in general. It was the outsourced compliance officer. These notes are actually just taken from one of the SEC risk reports. These were findings done back in 2016 when the SEC started to approve and affirm that you could use outsourced compliance officers. So us as qualified individual CISOs, the more regulators that start to green light that, give that a thumbs up, after that comes the scrutiny, comes the oversight. And as more companies start to write our name in the contact list under the contact CISO, and the regulators all do their information sharing, they go, oh, Michael Good's the CISO in 20 different organizations. We should talk to that guy. And I talk to peers all the time who are the outsourced compliance officer, and they've told me the regulators are starting to limit them to 4 to 5 firms before they start to ask them about their bandwidth or start to scrutinize the amount of effort that they're able to put into any single organization. And then that kind of translates into, more oversight of their clients. So these are things that we should start to anticipate and plan for, not necessarily tomorrow, but we know for a fact that this has happened to our peers in chief compliance officer role, the CFO role, the other outsourced qualified individuals that came before us. And it actually benefits us.
Yes, and Mike, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually have 2 other vCISOs on my staff just for that, because it wasn't because of the regulators, it was because the client said, well, how many companies are you the vCISO for? Do you have the best? So the clients were asking me that. Yeah. And I said, I have myself and 2 other qualified. So right now we're at 3 and we're good. We got the bandwidth, we can handle it. But yeah, that's a very important point about the bandwidth, because that's what they're going to ask.
It's like gremlins, right? You throw a little water on a CISO, virtual CISO.
Don't feed them after midnight.
Never feed me after midnight. Never.
Right.
Let's jump into that final slide and see if I could get a few more laughs out of everybody. Yeah, my goal is to what do they call that? Edutainment. Yeah, I'm an edutainer. I'd rather have a few laughs, a few takeaways that you'll remember. And this goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. How can we all future-proof? Like, let's be real about what's coming down the pipe. We have time. It's not like tomorrow the regulators are going to start to scrutinize us, but we know it's coming. It's happened to our peers. It's happened to other folks who have been the qualified individual. It continues to happen to them. So it's only a matter of time till the scope transfers over to us and the laser beam is on us virtual CISOs. So this is just a short list of how we could future-proof ourselves, try to make ourselves Teflon, bulletproof, however you want to describe it. But be prepared to demonstrate your qualifications, anything necessary to prove you're a qualified individual. Keep taking those certifications, keep contributing to the industry, to our community, right? Like, just like the bad guys, they call it big game hunting. They all get together and team up on an organization. For us, it's just good business. There's just not enough blue team guys. There's not enough good guys. We all have to team up and help ourselves be more qualified and educate each other. Things like that are going on right now with Log4j. There's so much going on. And that's actually another one I'll touch on when we get through this list. Know your client's business, know their industry, know the regulatory requirements. Back on that SEC slide, one of the areas those chief compliance officers screwed up, they were just disconnected from their clients. They didn't know the business. The regulators found that, and then they scrutinized it and they drilled in on it. Know what is going on in that segment that your clients are working in.
Hey,
And
Mike, I want to pause there because I think that's super important based on everything that you've gone through today and that Mike Good also brought up. And I'm wondering, is there a mandatory education that a vCISO requires from the business so that they are informed, right? So that you can do your job. And are you guys as a group, are you starting to require that for engagements? Because it sounds like, from a risk perspective, if you're at all disconnected from the business, then you may be at risk of not actually being a qualified individual in terms of having that intimate knowledge of your client.
Yeah, listen, you're exactly right. And things evolve so quickly, especially in terms of technology and cybersecurity threat. The landscape of today, the threat landscape today wasn't the threat landscape of a few years ago. Sure, there's some things that are similar, right? Phishing has existed for a long time, but let's look at how that's evolved between the smishing and vishing and just the endless amounts of campaigns that we see. It's going to continue to evolve. So you have to be able to show as a professional that you're keeping your tools sharp, that you have the latest and you're aware of what's going on. And then in terms of the business, the areas that you focus, I think a lot of us probably are a jack of all trades. I'll even call myself a jerk of all trades sometimes, just because it's, sometimes I feel that way because you spread yourself so thin sometimes. But if you could focus on healthcare, HIPAA, the retailers, the payment card, PCI, like if you could laser beam in on that, or if you have a large enough practice that you can laser beam in and have an individual just dedicated to that, maybe even build a whole segment of your team to focus on some of the high demand regulatory requirements, go for it. Start thinking about that, because that'll help with this issue of not knowing the business or not knowing the industry, not knowing the regulatory requirements. I run into this all the time where companies that do retail or do payment card don't even know what a qualified security assessor is. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if you're going to handle payment card information, you need to have one of those QSAs come through and give a very deep dive assessment so you understand what's going on. Like, I could give a high level, but I suggest you get the QSA, somebody who's actually been approved by PCI DSS to do such a thing, right? That's an example of laser beaming and knowing the regulatory requirement, knowing what's out there. And then of course, if you do have a client, make sure you know the policies, make sure you know those plans, the cookie cutter, the one size fits all, throw that crap out the window. The examiners are onto that. The insert name here, whether you're using one of the new fancy document management platforms that spits one out for you, or you're just doing a keyword search in a Word document, the regulators are scrutinizing that. We saw this happen 2 years ago when the SEC mentioned it in their risk alert that, yeah, it's great that companies have a WISP. It's great that companies have a BCP plan, but so many of the ones that we received from organizations contained insert company name here. Like, what freaking website did you buy that from? And this goes back to, again, let's learn from the history. Let's learn from things that happened from the qualified individuals in the past, the virtual CFOs and so forth here. And what I was going to mention too, Log4j, what happened last year, SolarWinds about the same time, right? What I'm starting to see and what we're starting to anticipate now is a few months after SolarWinds, many of the regulators started to disseminate a questionnaire to a lot of the member firms to say, what the hell did you do? Like, what was your response to SolarWinds? Because it was such a big event. And I suggest we all prepare for the same thing to happen with Log4j. Every government agency and regulatory body at this point in the last week has published something. FINRA and the SEC published theirs a few days ago. So we can anticipate probably right after the holidays, they might even just use the same questionnaire. Remove SolarWinds, insert 4J here. What are you doing? What is your resiliency? And the old, it didn't impact us, doesn't fly. You know, they need to see some work done. So one more area we could start future-proofing our clients and helping out.
Great, excellent.
Cool.
Mike, thank you. This was outstanding. I think there's, you know, in listening to this, you know, I think there's a lot of, you know, standardization from the vCISO side that will help each engagement, you know, be that type of engagement that can both, you know, provide the right level of connection between the vCISO and the business, and then protect the vCISO as well, and what's sure to be future scrutiny, as you suggested. Are there any questions from those that are out there for Mike? And Mike, thanks for doing a great job today.
I just had
Fun
one
times.
question. I just have one question, and this was actually the only question that I was going to ask today. Can you see the Patriots?
Not
You
quite.
just wanna-
Well, I can visualize it. You went on mute there, Mike. You're on mute. Mike, good. You're on mute.
We lost you, buddy.
Oh,
Here it
I'm
comes.
sorry. I was only going to ask one question today, and this is the question that I was going to have. Besides showing Mike my Patriots floating hat, it's magic. It's floating in air like the
Look at that
Patriots.
thing. That's
They're
awesome.
magic. But one of the things that when I read this, the invitation, the first thing that came to my mind was, are we supposed to be the morality police too? And I'll ask you this question in this way, in that I was working with a customer that had one of their account representatives in the financial industry, 401k, send 50 clients with name, address, social, account number, dollar amount to the wrong client,
Data breach.
unsecured.
Yeah.
And I said, you have to report this. And even the client that got it said, you know, you sent me somebody else's data, and I have all the data. I'm going to delete it, but what the hell's going on? And I said, you need to report this. You need to report this. And I could see they were hesitant, and they assured me they reported it, but I never got any real confirmation. So as the vCISO, what do we do in that situation, Mike?
It depends what the regulator's whistleblower programs like, the SEC paid out, I forget how many hundreds of millions of dollars to whistleblowers. And I'm joking, right? Like like the whistleblower programs are great. I don't suggest you become a whistleblower.
Right. But I mean, I don't feel good. I don't feel good about this client.
And that is something that some of us have to consider at some point in time. It's okay to fire a client. And if there's a client that potentially is operating in a way that could potentially jeopardize you, your reputation, your business.
Exactly.
You might want to respectfully decline the renewal and not have the bandwidth for future projects, depending on what the scope of work is. I've personally done that. I've quit, and I'll do it again. I just have, it's not that I'm a person of such insane integrity and morality. It's just that I've got to. This is my livelihood. I am a cybersecurity. I am a security professional. I have been since my undergrad back in the 90s when I focused on physical security. It's what I do. I wouldn't want a client's mistakes to drag me down with them.
And that's what because my name is on it. Good Cybersecurity. Our name is on this, and and I asked for proof. I said, well, okay, show me the report that you sent, and crickets. So
I think this is not on. It's similar, not the same as the relationship between a tax accountant and an individual too. So when they submit, it's different because they're submitting public or they're submitting returns typically from their systems, so they have to validate it. But it's similar. There's some accountability on both sides, but I think at some point you may not want to put your name on something if you're questioning the legitimacy of it.
Mike and Craig, this was fantastic today. And Mike, thank you. That was the answer I was looking for, because that's what I'm thinking in my mind. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to be associated with this company next year unless I get that proof.
Well, if you look at NYDFS, and it might not be something that you would even look at unless you're working with somebody who's falls under that in New York State. But the CISO is actually the person attesting to the valid program and the documents that you're. So it would in that particular case, and we should. It's not, again, like it won't be today, but in the future, we might be attesting to the cybersecurity posture of an organization that is literally a ticking time bomb. And I don't think any of us want to be standing on that Titanic when it smashes into that iceberg or
right. I don't want to be playing the violin while the Titanic goes down.
Yeah, there's plenty of organizations that need our help that are proactive about cybersecurity.
Right.
I'm not saying be so choosy, but definitely vet your clients the same way they probably vet you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I just want to say this was very helpful and fantastic presentation, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for participating. Really helped.
Good. Yeah, great job, Mike, and appreciate the input from everybody, and Mike, good as well. It's always great to have that input from the audience. I think if Mike Morano, if you're good, we can close this out. Any final thoughts, or we cover everything?
Well, listen, we got 2 weeks left in the year. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy. I know, the news headlines say that it looks like Omicron's trying to cancel Christmas. So I hope everybody still has a great holiday. Healthy New Year.
It's a good way of putting it, Mike. It does look like Omicron.
Scrooge, Grinch, you name it.
Well, great. So we'll get this posted up on the YouTube channel. I'll let everybody know from the attendees when that's available. And we'll look forward to your suggestions for content January, February, March. We'd love to hear from you. And this was really great. I think there's more to this as well when we talk about, the liability and protecting, the virtual CISO as they try to do their job. That's a big one for me. You know, I think there's a lot there, and you know, it's sort of uncharted waters with a lot of these things coming out. So you know, let's keep educating each other, and everybody, as Mike said, you know, stay safe, have happy holidays, and we'll see you all in January.
Likewise. Thank you, gentlemen.
All
Looking
right.
forward to
Cheers,
next month.
everyone.
Yep.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
gang.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you, Mike.
You too, Mike. Be good.
Yep.